At some point in your life, you or someone you know and love will find themselves caring for someone nearing the end of their life. This can be full of challenging decisions, endless documents, and even the thought that somehow your prayers are not being heard. In this episode of the Church Help Desk, a panel of doctors, legal counsel, and caretakers help with answers to these life questions.
As we start today, I just wanted to start with Dr. Heather Moore. And do you mind sharing a little bit from your experience about the differences between hospice and palliative care? Because a lot of these issues do arise at the end of life, and that's when we're forced to kind of deal with those head on. And so if you don't mind just kind of sharing a little bit about that.
Sure, no problem at all. So I'm a palliative care physician. I work at UAMS in the VA, but when I'm at talks like these, I'm very much an Arkansas Baptist. So I'm going to take those hats off, and everything I say today is going to be colored with my own opinion and not supported by either institution for which I work. That's my caveat. All right, I've perfected that statement. So palliative care is a medical specialty, just like cardiology or gastroenterology. But what we specialize in is easing the suffering that comes with serious illness. Primarily here in Central Arkansas, most of our palliative care is focused on those patients who have cancer. And so in my practice, both at UAMS and the VA, primarily I'm seeing patients with cancer. Sometimes I'm just helping them with the symptoms of their disease and the treatment for their disease, because we know that treatment for cancer can sometimes be really rough. Sometimes I'm helping them with advanced care planning, making sure we're honoring their wishes for their care, because a lot of times these are things you don't think of until you have to think of them, and then it's really important that we get some things down in writing, so I do a lot of that. And then some folks I'm helping as they've progressed with their disease or other things are going on, I help them with end-of-life care, and so that is hospice care. So all hospice is palliative care, not all palliative care is hospice. And that's the best way to think about it. So hospice care is focused on providing comfort and quality of life, valuing every day we have at the end of life. Because we have to have numbers, because Medicare says we have to have numbers, they pulled 6 months out of the sky, quite literally, and said, hospice care is for folks who want to focus on comfort and quality of life, forgoing curative treatment, or treatment in general, usually with cancer patients, because we're at a point where it's not curative anymore, for those folks who have a prognosis of 6 months or less. And so it's a interdisciplinary care, which all palliative care is, but really focused on, at the end of life, how can we give each day value, each day meaning, each day a good quality of life, whether that is controlling pain or other symptoms, whether that's providing support to caregivers who are struggling with anticipatory grief because they see what's about to happen with their loved one. So there's a variety of things that go into hospice care. In this country, most hospice care happens at home, which a lot of people don't understand. They think, well, we signed up for hospice, so when do we move? And that's a great misnomer. Over in other countries, that might be the case, where you go move to a hospice house. But in this country, most hospice care happens at home. And most of the care provided to the patient in that process is provided by family. No one moves in with you. No nurse comes. Now you have 24/7 phone access to a nurse, but a lot of the care happens through family. And that's really hard in our current society, where here in Arkansas, most families, both people have to work to make ends meet. And so they're like, well, how are we going to take care of mom or dad? Because both of us have to work, or we're not going to make our rent, we're not going to make our mortgage. And that's where a lot of really uncomfortable conversations have to start about, well, how do we best care for your loved one? So part of my job is sometimes helping families as we navigate, trying to figure out where's the best place for your loved one to receive end-of-life care. And so that is the long-winded answer of what's the difference between palliative care and hospice care.
No, and Dr. Moore, I really appreciate that. And again, part of Shelley's role, as a lot of you all know, is to help sort out those decisions, help lead someone or counsel someone through those decisions. Shelley's not actually providing the care, as you all know, but she's coordinating either with those family members, with those caregivers in the home, to try to be sure that the correct decision's made, One of the things that we're going to hear from Dr. Smith, and Mike's going to ask you in just a second, is in order for all those things to be carried out well, there's some advanced planning that needs to take place. You need to tell someone how you want that to work. In order for Shelley to make good decisions about that, it's helpful to have some of those care decisions recorded. And so, Mike, do you have a question for Dr. Smith?
Yeah, I just want to encourage the other panelists, as you have input on maybe another answer, just feel free to kind of pass the mic and do that. So Dr. Smith, with regard to advanced care planning, what, in your judgment, are the two most important issues that we face in kind of making those decisions?
Well, with a very good-looking, intelligent person from the university beside me who's a Baptist, I'll have to tell you, you may want to discredit me a little bit. But I have worked at the Baptist Hospital for 42 years, so I've been everything but dunked. And so, but anyway, is that okay?
We'll let you
That's
go.
an inside joke. I am a Christian. So, all right. So before I talk about this, let me just read you a paragraph from a lady who I think really sums up the story very well of my answer to this question. She said, "Mother began a slow decline. Mom and I had talked about everything, and I had talked about my problems until I was bored with them. But the most we had talked about her end-of-life wishes was when she would see somebody and she would say, 'If I'm ever like that, pull the plug.' But when the time came, there was no plug to pull. There rarely is. Toward the end of life, she could no longer decide what she wanted for lunch, let alone what she wanted for health care. And those decisions fell to me. I was surprised. I was, in many ways, blindsided by having to make those decisions. I still remember one day when I was on a deadline. She was a journalist, and she got that phone call from the doctor at a long-term care facility who said, 'Your mother has had another bout of pneumonia. Do you want her to have antibiotics?' And I froze. I thought, what is he asking me? Do I want my mother to live or die? Could I call you back? Could I have another minute? Many months and many decisions after that, I began to realize how deeply I wished that I'd heard my mother's voice in my ear telling me what she would have wanted. Unlike Shelley, Heather, our patients we're not a cancer institute, so we have a lot of cancer patients, but we have a lot more probably heart failure, lung failure, dementia failure. My dad went through dementia for 7 years, so I sort of feel like, well, maybe that's my plight. I hope not, but times I'm running out of time. So what this woman said, I wish we had had the conversation. So if there's anything I want you to take home today is have the conversation. Your kids will probably be like mine or your relatives who say, oh, at Thanksgiving, that's a good time to do it. You got all the family there. You got them trapped. And they say, oh, but we want to watch the football game. Oh, Daddy, you're not going to die. Oh, it's too early. Well, it's always too early until it's what? Too late. And so this doesn't have to be as detailed as what I will tell you about. It ought to be detailed. It's going to be a lot better if you go into details, and maybe a little time later we'll talk about some more of the details. But have the conversation. And the second thing you really need to do is declare someone who can speak for you when you can't speak for yourself. You wouldn't believe all the consults we get in the hospital. We'll get ethics consults. And the whole thing about it is, who speaks for this patient when they can't speak for themselves? If I ask all of you right now, who would it be? I bet you in a moment you'd be able to tell me, number one, number two. You need to have a number two, number three, because I always say, what happens when your first best child is in China and didn't take their cell phone with them? We can connect with almost everybody by cell phone now very quickly, but there's always a chance. Then what happens when my wife gets dementia too, and she can't make those decisions? And we wrote this thing out 10 years ago, and it's no longer up to date. So those are the two most important things that I can tell you. Of all the things I'd like to tell you today, name that person. Because the other thing is, it's best to write it down on a piece of paper. It doesn't have, you don't have to go to an attorney to do it. You can just get your neighbor, ideally two people that aren't related to you. You could write it down in your own handwriting, and then you could get two witnesses that are not related to you ideally. Although by Arkansas law, one could be related, but you can see there can be some conflict of interest. It's best to have a form, and later on I'm going to give you a form that you can take home, and we can spend some more time with.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, that's what I want to leave my message today.
Well, and I want to hear from David and Dylan on this topic as well. But one of the things in the conversation guide that Mike referenced in the left-hand pocket of your folder, if you open it up to the center, it talks about this very thing. So the bottom left-hand side, it talks about how to initiate a conversation like this. The two phrases it uses, it says first share, then solve, right? So take the time to hear before you start looking for solutions. Let's kind of talk about, let's share before we solve. It talks about, is there a need for a family meeting? Do you need to gather everyone around? And then finally, how can you achieve kind of that alignment while also being transparent? Mike made a great reference yesterday when we were at Ouachita about being transparent. It's hard for us as adults to be transparent, to fully kind of put everything out there, even amongst family. And so I hope this will be a helpful guide in that process. But David or Dylan, is there anything you would like to add as far as how to start that advanced caregiving conversation?
I've always got something to add. What do you mean? Seriously, I think having the conversation is easier today than ever before. And I think the reason for that is the folks sitting on my left here and the ones on my right. The palliative doctors have come into vogue, and they are helping not only deal with families. And when I'm in the hospital, palliative doctors are always there. They're being called in to consult on different situations, and they're wonderful. And they help, talk about this whole issue with people. These folks are also, as you see today, involved in community service. They're out in the community trying to help us understand the importance of doing advanced directives and taking care of things. So I really give a lot of credit to them for what they do for us. Also, the estate planning attorneys like Dylan. Almost everybody I know, Dylan, does medical directives as a part of their wills package or trust package now. It's just something they automatically do. And in doing that, they have to ask the question, do you want hydration? Do you want nutrition? They have to ask those kind of questions when they go through the process in time. So I think it's easier now than ever before. But to me, I think the most important thing about the question is who asks it. What I mean by that is you got to find the right person to do that. Now, sometimes that's the family member, and most often that's the case. This is pretty, Shelley and I were talking this week, this is pretty pertinent to me because my mom's 93 and a half, and she's been in Baptist Hospital 7 times in the last 4 months. Been in great health until then, but she's been in the hospital 7 times and rehab 3 times, and she's struggling. She's having some issues right now. And that's a part of her situation, what she's going through. But we've always been close, and she knows what I've done for a living, obviously, so we can talk about it. We've been talking about heaven and talking about her care and talking about what she wants with feeding tubes and what about these issues that might be ahead. So sometimes the family member is the perfect person to do it. Sometimes when I was a pastor, I would be called upon as a pastor to do it, especially when it was a bad prognosis. And that's okay. I didn't mind. I'd go in, and my way of doing it would be simply to say, ma'am or sir, have you talked to your doctor or your family about what you want done now that this is happening? And if they give me a clear answer, that's fine. If they don't, then I pursue it a little bit and go, well, what would you want to happen? And I put them on the spot and make them start thinking it through a little bit. There's another person that I think can help you when you're at wit's end. Because sometimes I see families and nobody knows, mom and dad won't talk about it. They just will not talk about it with family. Sometimes a key person may be their primary care physician. I was in El Dorado yesterday with a friend, and we took care of some of their family members, and they were reminding me of the story about how this man was driving erratically and crazy, and we needed to get him off the streets bad. And I actually went to our church at Emmanuel, and I told our policeman there, I said, I've done this, just follow him home. And you'll have all kinds of reasons to give him a ticket, make him take a driving test, and everything will be fine. You know, we can get him out. I couldn't get him to do it. I literally could not get the police officers to follow him home. I'm frustrated. So we ended up calling the primary care physician, Dr. K, and called the nurse. Couldn't talk to directly to the doctor, but called the nurse. Said, listen, he's coming in next week for his checkup. Here's the problem. Here's the situation. Could you help us? And we walked in. I went to the meeting with him, and we sat down, and Dr. K said, okay, went through all the stuff. She said, now, I want you to have a driving test. It's time to do that. I have it set up at BRI on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Here's your prescription. He said, yes, ma'am. Went and got the driving test. He failed it. He had 30 days to appeal. He didn't understand what appeal means, and so we got his license. And it was all because of Dr. K. So again, what I'm trying to say is I think it's important who starts that conversation and bringing it up. I would suggest to people, and I tell people, don't, be careful, don't, you should, Mama, you should do this, or you need to do this. If you're too pushy, that's a problem. I tell you, I say use stories. Mama, I notice some of your friends have all moved to Parkway Village, and they've given up their homes. Have you ever thought about that? And they may react immediately and defensively, but now you've put the thought in their mind. And it may take a little time to work through the process, but at least they've got it, they're thinking about it. And it's been brought up to their attention. So anyway, just some thoughts.
Dylan, as somebody who sits in those conversations with people when they're trying to maybe make those specific plans about advanced care, what are things that you see, that you run into that maybe people don't consider, or things they should consider?
Yeah, so in the documents that I usually create, I usually do create a package of documents, and there's several in there, and usually people are overwhelmed by the amount of paper that I make them put in front of them and make them sign. But all those different documents do different things. But I always tell people at a bare minimum, there's about 3 documents you need, and 2 of those that I name are your healthcare directives. And it's a conversation that people don't like to have. It's just one of those personal things. Like, most people, we don't talk about money. They also don't talk about what healthcare they want. It's just one of those topics that it's off limits. And with the individuals that I work with, even when they have the document in front of them and they've had it for months to think about, they still haven't thought about it, and they don't want to think about it. They said they wanted one. They said they know who they want to make the decisions. But when it comes to the actual care about whether or not they want intervening treatment and whether or not they want to do a DNR with a pulse form, and I'll talk more about that in a second, they still don't want to make those decisions. So, it's scary to me too because of what we do at the foundation, but then also because of the statistics showing 70% are going to need that. So. What I do, and I would say, one, get the form and talk to your family members about it as much as you can. Put it in front of them so they can, like David said, get the thought in their head, and so they'll start talking about it. And then, hopefully, over time, they'll finally execute that. But it's one of those things. Like for me, it's the younger I'm relatively young, I think, or still think that I am, and
Yeah. David said he was a child, so it's young enough.
We'll give you young. You'll get that.
Right,
It can be young.
We'll give you
Just go
young.
with
Yeah.
young. Okay. But I have all these documents in place, and even the people that I've named in mind, they don't want to talk about it with me, even though I want, I'm kind of more conscious that I needed one of those, and so. I think it is easier to have that conversation today, and one way is because of electronic communication and things like that. So my agents and people that I've named in succession, I just force that information on them because every year I kind of go through, or if I make updates, I send it to them, and I send them a letter that says, "In case I die." And so I think there's a certain generation that they appreciate that a lot more than actually sitting down and having the conversation. And so I have, certain people, they want to sit down and have, 3 or 4 meetings to go through every document or every conversation. But with the certain people, they never even want to see me. They don't want to talk to me. They want an email, and they want to see it in front of them. They print it off, sign it themselves, And so there's certain people that might appreciate that in your family, so they may not want to have that conversation face to face, but if you put that documentation in front of them, they're going to read it because they want to know. But the other part of it is a lot of times I've noticed with those type of documents where you show your intent, what you wanted, your wishes when it comes to your care or how things should be handled. A lot of times family members will treat that like the gospel truth more than anything than I can put in a legal document. And I can say to people or to the beneficiaries or whatever it is, no, your mom and dad put this in a legal document and this is what it says. They go, I don't care, mom and dad said this. They put this in a letter and they told me this is what they wanted. And so they don't care anything that's been signed and notarized or anything that's been filed with the court. They follow the instructions of mom and dad that was handwritten or that was said to them in a verbal conversation. So I'll say they don't want to have that conversation, but that is like a permanent memory that goes into their mind and it stays with them. So I think having the conversation or forcing the conversation on with electronic communication or a letter will solidify that with them. But
One of the things, and you've both, Dr. Smith and David and Dylan, you've all mentioned forms or documents. So what are some of those critical forms or documents? I know, Dylan, you mentioned the Pulse form. Dr. Smith, you said you may have a form. Tell us a little bit about some of those forms that need to be part of this process.
So I'll just briefly say what I usually draft, and then I'll let them kind of flesh that out. So generally, in the healthcare directives, there's usually two. One's a healthcare power of attorney or a healthcare proxy, where you name somebody as your agent to make those healthcare decisions. And generally, that person can also access medical records and insurance records if necessary. And like Dr. Smith said, you always want to name multiple, because if you just say my spouse, well, that's kind of natural, but what happens if spouse predeceases you? Or what happens if spouse is also incapacitated as well? So I would say at least two, but name as many as you think, and they all need to be people that you are comfortable with making that decision and know would carry out your intent. And just briefly, with naming those people, it's not I think it's maybe a Southern culture thing, or maybe it's just universal, but they say, well, I want to name Jim, he's the oldest son. Well, Jim's in China, or Jim's in rehab, or Jim's something. Don't name oldest people or the oldest son or who has the most money or the most education. Name the right person who's going to make the decision for your care. So I'll stop there. So the second document that I always draft is a living will, which they can be as simple as, this is the kind of treatment I would want once I get in this certain situation. And the form that I use, it says artificial hydration, nutrition. When you get in kind of I'll just say a permanently unconscious, irreversible condition as determined by your treating physician. And so those are the two main forms. And there's also a form that was passed by our legislature, I think it was in 2017, called the Pulse form, or Physician Ordered Life-Sustaining Treatment Act, I think is what it came from. So that's where Pulse comes from. And it goes in a little bit more detail. It actually includes a DNR order, which has to be signed off by a medical doctor, and so that's, a lot of people get that confused with the living will, that they think that's a DNR, but that's not. That's a medical order that has to be signed off on by your physician or a doctor. So that's something that you take with you to the doctor and fill that out, and it has a little bit more detail and what intervening treatment you might want. But yeah.
Before Dr. Smith adds to that, so one of the things I heard Dylan say is you need to do a spiritual gift assessment on your kids, so you know which one to choose and to write into that document, because they need to have some mercy, grace, and discernment in those things. So anyway, but David, you want to?
Very true. The healthcare power of attorney is meant to name somebody to make decisions for you at a point where you cannot make your own decisions. Up until the time you're at end of life, the medical directive comes into play then. Now I'm going to add a question to these palliative doctors because I like to pick on them. This is a legal document saying this is what I want done in case I'm at the end of life, permanently unconscious, terminally ill with a disease, taking my life in a short amount of time. Is that what you're going to do?
Let me touch something first before the pulsed form. We fought through two legislatures because it's sort of misunderstood. It is an immediately actionable order. And I, as a physician, have the power to sign that thing. And I have to name somebody that I can talk to about it. But it says either one of two things. You may be like one lady in town that says, when my blood pressure is 30, I want you to still be pumping on my chest. I don't think 99% of you want that. But we've got one for her that says full code and full treatment. And I say, Rose, we will do that for you. I assure you we'll do that for you. It won't be comfortable for us to do it. This, however, is a form that I hope doesn't apply to anybody in this room, because it means you have, and you wouldn't be surprised that you die within the next year, okay? All of you look so young. I think you've got about 40 years left. Amen? Yeah. Amen. So, but someday, for many of us, things are going to break, and we've got stage 4 cancer. We've gone through all the chemotherapy. By the way, we call ourselves supportive medicine doctors rather than palliative, because we get mixed up. But people accept that better, because it means that when we come to the bedside of the 93-year-old been in the hospital 7 times, we don't have an agenda to get you, moved to the next level. But it may be time to talk about a pulsed form. And for some of our heart failure patients, it says do not resuscitate. But if we come in the hospital, we'll give a trial of selective treatment, because, mom says she's not ready to throw in the towel yet. Life's still pretty good, so I'll take the hospital. But maybe I don't want to do that. But you will have to I'm not telling you what to put on, In fact, it may say full treatment. But that's a good one when you're going in the hospital 7 times, because as soon as you get to the emergency room, they don't start asking those dumb questions. Are you ready for DNR? Because you don't have a relationship. It's not an appropriate time to do it then. All right, sorry for the aside. I'm passionate about that.
Yeah, and everyone knows DNR, right? What we're talking about there? Okay, good. Yeah.
So as far as your, quote, living will, the 2013 legislature called it an advanced care plan. So whatever you want to call it. To me, it is just the wish list. It is a value statement. It is not immediately actionable, because the person, for your mother, I suspect you're the person who's written down as the surrogate decision maker or the agent. If you've written out the durable power of attorney for health care, that's just semantic stuff, legal stuff. But anyway, if Dr. Moore says, I don't agree with her, he's got the power. He's got the power to say what's going to be done to that doctor. We may not like it. I don't like the fact, and there may be some, if you want to take it to court, the judge might rule in a different way. But I have to do what he says. That's why it's so important to pick out your agent and write it down. Because I just had a very well-known person, and the son-in-law was a doctor, and he was saying, do we have to take the directions of the agent? And I said, yes, you do. You may not agree. And he's smart. If he's smart, he's not going to get into this conflict thing and not take care of the family and their wishes. But if there's a tie to be broken, you're the man.
Well, and one thing too, and I'm going to let Mike ask the next question after Dr. Moore addresses this, but POLST, what we're talking about is P-O-L-S-T, okay? So again, physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. So P-O-L-S-T is the abbreviation for that form, as Dylan described and Dr. Smith just alluded to. But Dr. Moore, you want to add to that?
Yes, I will add. So I kind of have 1 foot in a state agency and 1 foot in a federal agency, and I will tell you that the rules change as I cross the bridge. So that's really important. For those of you who are pastors or are ministers, you have veterans in your church, right? And so what you need to know is that in the VA system, if you're veteran members or if you're a veteran yourself and you come to the VA and you're incapacitated to where I cannot have you make your medical decisions, and we're talking about end-of-life issues or sometimes even not end-of-life issues, like maybe an emergent surgery or something like that, I have to follow a hierarchy. So Arkansas changed up their laws to where I don't have to follow a hierarchy in order to name a surrogate if there's no advance directive, no agent named. So I can say, you know what, this person's married, but the best friend's been at the bedside, and the best friend sat in a fishing boat and has talked about what they would and would not want when their buddy died. And that best friend knows this guy since he was 8 years old and knows what he wants for his care, which is what I'm asking the agent to do. I'm asking the agent to say, if your loved one were up and active and knowing what's going on, what would they want in this situation? Your best estimate, because obviously we're not in each other's heads. At the VA, I don't have that flexibility. I have a hierarchy. So there is more than one occasion where I have a veteran who's in a bad way, there are some important decisions that are needing to be made, and they're needing to be made now. And we find out that the veteran is still legally married to someone that they haven't talked to in 15 years. I have to go to that person for decision making. Now, they can decline, but I have to go to that person. And if they decline, then I have to have consensus of adult children. Do you know how many of our veterans have more than one child? Our record is 27. And thankfully, before he lost capacity, he created an advance directive naming one of them. Or else we would never have been able to get through all of that. So it is a life thing. I tell our medical students, this is adulting. Every adult should have an agent, even if you don't want to fill out the living will. Because when you're facing cancer, when you're facing congestive heart failure, and they're talking about a heart transplant, sometimes it's hard to go to that place to talk about, okay, if I'm dying, this is what I want. But at least have someone who knows you well enough. So on mine, it's my husband, who would have a hard time, doesn't like hospitals, really can't stand doctors, but knows me well enough.
He just happens to be married to one.
Except the one.
It's a small,
You
small
know
hurdle.
my husband.
Yeah, small hurdle. Yeah.
But wouldn't do things that I wouldn't want, would have the strength to say this is not what Heather wants. My dad is my secondary. My mom is nowhere on that list because, and she got her feelings hurt, because I would never want to put her in a position where she had to withdraw life support from me because she would never recover. And when I phrased it that way, she was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
And she's an artist, so.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so, you have to think about those things. If you have a spouse who just is not going to be able to make that decision, even though you know that's what you want, then they don't need to be your agent. And that's a really hard conversation to have. It can make, you may sleep on the couch a few nights, but that's okay. When it comes down to it, you want the person who speaks for you, and that might be your fishing buddy.
Good.
And, one thing you brought up very important. The legal term is agent if you sign a piece of paper, surrogate. If you come into our hospital, now hopefully we will be reputable, accountable, everything else, but you're vulnerable because some mistakes been made because your fourth cousin from California came in and that's the face the doctor saw, so they start talking about the family. Sometimes those folks hang around for days or weeks and find out maybe that wasn't the best choice, but the doctor has the responsibility to name a person once you come in the hospital. So protect yourself from us doctors making the wrong mistake.
Just to turn the conversation a little bit, it seems to me that all of these conversations we need to have about end-of-life care, about advanced care, the thing that holds them up is the fact that we don't like to think about the end of life at all. All of us tend to want to push that down the road. I was reminded every time that I'm at a funeral of Ecclesiastes 7:2, it's better to go to a house of mourning than go to a house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. There's a reminder from the author there that this is the end of all of us, so it makes sense to think about it in advance. But having those conversations about dying, none of us want to have those. So as a physician, and I'll probably ask all of you guys, how is it that you have conversations? Start with you, Dr. Moore. How do you have conversations with folks who are near the end of life?
Okay, so it is very individualized. Sometimes I'm being called in literally the last 10 minutes of a patient's life, and I think Dr. Smith has probably had those conversations as well, which is not what I prefer, because I'm a stranger, and I'm asking them to put a whole lot of trust in me to best identify based on their goals, what is the correct treatment plan? And that's a lot of pressure. And so, Dr. Smith kind of alluded to this, so the zen of palliative care, the way we can maintain longevity in this job where we're dealing with death a lot, is to realize that the end game, the end result, is not my goal. And if I can walk in there without an agenda, I get a whole lot farther. So there are a lot of very interesting names for my specialty, like the death squad, the DNR squad, and all of that, but really that's not what we're there for. And I think when families know that I sit down, because often doctors don't sit down, when I sit down in the room and I ask them about their loved one, or at the VA, if the veteran's still there, I ask them about his or her military service. And I kind of try to establish that personal thing, they can trust me a little bit more. And then we talk about, what do you understand? Because sometimes we doctors are really, really bad at explaining things, because we're human too. Most doctors did not get into medicine to tell their patients they're dying and that I can't fix you. And so it is a very human thing to avoid this conversation, even from the end of doctors. I know doctors who I see them physically become so uncomfortable, like I'm afraid they're gonna vomit in the room when we're having these conversations. And these are not newbies. These are doctors who have been practicing for a long time. So they're not hearing it from their doctors, and sometimes they don't have a good understanding of where they are. And I'm the one who gets to come in and kind of talk about that and sort of update them. And then also part of it is really allowing a lot of times for an emotional response, because even if you know things are bad, when you have someone in a white coat come and say, things are bad, and we need to make some decisions, that feels different. And sometimes that's as far as I get in our first conversation, especially in a hospitalized patient. For my clinic patients, it's a little bit different. So some of my clinic patients, I am seeing them for symptom management only. Their cancer is going to go into remission, or there's, whatever we're working with is going to be time limited, and then they get to go on with their lives and hopefully not need me for a very long time. But the vast majority of my patients in clinic, they have a disease process that's going to get worse over time, whether it's cancer or heart failure or COPD, whatever. And we're walking through there, and we're doing some advanced care planning, and we're talking about how things are going. How are you feeling about all this? What do you feel about this next round of chemo? And I find that from my end, those are probably the more satisfying conversations, because like the other Dr. Moore mentioned, they get to know me and they trust me, and they know that I'm not going to tell them something that I'm not concerned about. And those tend to go better, but not always the same. I think of one patient in particular, and she came to clinic the first time for symptom management. She was already not doing well, and she knew what kind of doctor I was, and she set the tone of our relationship by telling me, Dr. Moore, I have claimed my healing. I was like, okay, I'm not afraid of that, Baptist. She's like, no, Dr. Moore, I have claimed my healing. And that was her way of telling me, we are not going to talk about this. We are not going to talk about anything other than me getting better, even though everything was going badly. And when things eventually went very badly and she was no longer able to participate and she was in an ICU, some of the best family meetings I ever had were with her mother and aunties and uncles and cousins, and nothing changed. She stayed in the ICU, but we walked along together because I didn't have an agenda. I didn't come in there and say, all we're doing is keeping her alive. We're not helping her. If I had come guns blazing like that, it would have gone nowhere. But eventually, she did have a very peaceful death in the hospital, in the ICU, but it was a peaceful death, and that mother was able to walk away knowing she did everything for her kid, which is what the patient wanted. And so I think that's where a lot of people misunderstand what we do, is that it's not about me coming in and telling you what a horrible family member you are because you want your loved one to be on a ventilator. That's never what I want to do, but it's trying to meet folks where they are and help them to have the right information so then they can make decisions that are based on their values.
And Dr. Smith, Dr. Smith, so what about those statements that God's working a miracle here? We don't want to interfere with God's timing. or just the do everything. How do you deal with those type instructions from family members?
Those are some of the hardest things because theologically, we'll find some divergent opinions in here, about miracles. We use that in conversation all the time. If I ask any of you, have you seen someone raised from the dead? Has anyone seen that? I believe God has the power to do it. I believe he has the power to do any miracle that he wants. I just haven't seen. And then there's theologically, we all believe in the power of prayer, and we use the term providence, and we believe in his healing power. But what is so hard for us is we'll see someone that is imminently dying, and we see them suffering, and we're going to wait on that miracle. Most of the time, they've never been in a church building for 40 years, but they've got a relationship, and on this special occasion, so we just have to walk alongside with them and try to help them navigate and understand and affirm what their thoughts are, religiously or about God's power, because it doesn't help. We cannot argue their theology and make a difference. So that's one thing. But again, we're taught so much about trying to have the right thing to say. My wife says, you've got a long way to go. You still don't say the right thing in the right situation. But we're always, this term of we're hoping for the best, but we're preparing for the worst. Many times we have to say, well, we ask for permission. That's another part of our Bible talk training is, would it be okay if we talked about such and such, even when we're talking about advanced care planning? When we were, have them in our office, I was a heart specialist for 35 years. I didn't have much time, but in 1 minute I could get some things done, and I can do that very quickly when they're coming in with a heart attack. I was bold enough to know that things are treacherous and I need to ask these questions. But that question about, God's going to heal me is a perplexing thing for our chaplains, for our doctors, and I think we have to walk that road very carefully.
And I'll just piggyback on that. So that one particular patient that I mentioned, because I hung in there with Mom, she got to a place where if she's not healed here, she'll be healed in heaven. So either way, we're victorious. That is a win in my book. Now, I had to go in and talk to those ICU residents every single day because they were distressed. They're like, we're torturing this woman. What are we doing? We're not helping her. And remember, doctors are human beings. They have a lot of distress when things are not going well. And so a lot of what I was doing, the family was fine. We were there. If she's not healed here, she'll be healed in heaven. And they were going to be okay with that. It was the team of doctors and nurses that were having the hardest time. And so a lot of our job as well is to go behind and talk to them about, we are honoring this patient's wish. And you guys are doing the best you can. And we're going to hang in there with you too. So give your doctors a little bit of a break sometimes.
And there's a study that's been shown 60% of patients in the intensive care unit, it's called the support study, 60% of patients, they would say, I don't want to make a decision, I'll leave it up to the kids. Mm-hmm. And man, and then they say, oh, we don't know, we never talked about it. Therefore, we must do what? Everything. And what is everything? And so that hurts us a great deal to see that suffering going on, because then we have to sort of unwind a lot of mess that could have been solved by just a simple conversation. Even if she said, if I ever get in that situation, pull the plug. That's not enough, but it is more than what we get many times.